Welcome to Ripper's Nighttime Tales, a chilling series of bedtime horror stories narrated by the horror streamer Mr. Rippers with soft rain and thunder. Drift off to multiple scary tales perfect for late night listening on rumble.com. Do hit that like button and consider following the channel. Leave a comment letting me know where and when you listen. Let's build a community. Okay, let's get started. Part 1. The Quiet Plains. The static on the radio was not white noise. It was a color, a texture. It was the gray of a dead television screen, the grit of dust between molars. Eli Warren adjusted the gain on his portable Tascam recorder, watching the VU meter needle twitch spasmodically, burying itself in the red before falling dead silent. He wasn't recording anything yet, just the ambient hum of the infinite American Midwest, but the equipment was acting up. It had been acting up since he crossed the county line into Harlow Bend. The heat was a physical weight, a heavy, suffocating blanket of 90-degree oppression that shimmered off the cracked asphalt of Route 44. To his left and right, the cornfields stretched out like a golden-brown ocean, the stalks dry and whispering in a wind that felt more like the exhaust of a furnace than a breeze. It was late October, yet the harvest had not been brought in. The corn stood tall, dead, and waiting. Eli shifted in the driver's seat of his beat-up Volvo, the leather sticky against his shirt. He was a man defined by sound. For 20 years, he had chased stories for public radio, hunting for the texture of place, as his producer called it. He had recorded the damp echoes of Seattle sewers and the sharp staccato rhythms of New York subway stations, but Harlow Bend was silent. It was a silence that felt manufactured, a heavy lid screwed tight over a boiling pot. His assignment was simple, a fluff piece on the most average town in America, a title bestowed upon Harlow Bend by a census algorithm 3 weeks ago. It was supposed to be a story about apple pie, high school football, and the resilience of the heartland, but as the town limit sign peeling white paint on rusted iron flashed by, Eli felt a prickle of unease at the base of his skull. The sign didn't say welcome. It just said Harlow Bend, Est Itzhen Babai Josharar, and underneath, spray painted in a jagged, violent hand that had been partially scrubbed away, the soil feeds. He rolled into Main Street at exactly 2 p.m. The town looked like a film set preserved in amber. The buildings were brick, 2 stories high, with awnings that had faded from bright reds and blues to varying shades of dusty pastel. A single traffic light swayed on a wire above the intersection of Main and Elm, blinking a lazy, hypnotic yellow. There were people, but they moved with a strange economy of motion. A man sweeping the sidewalk in front of a hardware store did so with a rhythmic, trance-like cadence. Swish, pause, swish, pause. A woman pushing a stroller stopped to stare at Eli's car as it idled past. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just watched, her eyes tracking him with the precision of a predator, or perhaps prey that knows it has been spotted. Eli pulled into the gravel lot of the only motel in town, the resting place. The name struck him as morbid. He killed the engine. The silence rushed back in, ringing in his ears. He grabbed his kit bag, headphones, shotgun microphone, XLR cables, and the recorder and stepped out. The air smelled of ozone and rotting vegetation, a sweet, cloying scent that coated the back of his throat. Checking in? The voice came from the shadows of the motel office porch. Eli turned to see a man sitting in a rocking chair that wasn't rocking. He was impossibly old, his skin the texture of the dried tobacco leaves hanging in the drying barns Eli had passed miles back. "Yeah," Eli said, hoisting his bag. "Eli Warren." I called ahead. The old man didn't blink. His eyes were milky, rimmed with red. "The radio man, we heard." "News travels fast," Eli said, forcing a polite smile. "News travels how it wants," the man wheezed. He stood up, his joints popping like dry twigs. "Room 4. Don't mind the plumbing. It groans. Pipes are old, they go deep. Eli took the key, a heavy brass thing attached to a piece of driftwood. Thanks. Say, I noticed the corn is still up. Little late for the harvest, isn't it? The old man stopped with his hand on the screen door. He looked out toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in bruised purples and bloody oranges. It ain't ready, the old man murmured. Waitin' on the frost, waitin' on the moon. Right, Eli said, though he knew enough about farming to know that was nonsense. You harvested when the moisture content was right, not when the moon told you to? He settled into room 4. It was clean, but smelled of mildew and something else, something metallic like copper pennies. He set up his equipment on the small desk, plugging in his laptop and booting up his audio editing software. He wanted to test the ambient levels. He put on his headphones, large noise-canceling cans that sealed him off from the world, and pointed the shotgun mic toward the window. He hit asterisk. Record. Through the headphones, the world was amplified. He heard the distant call of a crow, the rumble of a truck miles away. But underneath it all, there was a thrum. Low-frequency vibration, hovering right around 18 hertz, the ghost frequency, the range that causes hallucinations and anxiety in humans. It was constant. It was coming from the ground. Eli frowned and adjusted the dials. The needle on the digital display was vibrating. He turned the gain up. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like a heartbeat. Slow, massive, and deep underground. A knock at the door made him jump, ripping the headphones off. The sound of the heartbeat vanished, replaced by the hum of the mini-fridge. Eli opened the door. Standing there was a woman in a beige uniform, a star pinned to her chest. She was tall, broad-shouldered, with hair graying at the temples pulled back into a severe bun. Sheriff Carol Burns. Mr. Warren, she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was flat, devoid of the Midwestern hospitality the brochure promised. Sheriff, Eli said, to what do I owe the pleasure? Just checking in on visitors. We don't get many media types. She looked past him, eyeing the recording equipment on the desk. Fancy gear. You here to record the birds? I'm here to record the town, the people. It's a puff piece, Sheriff. Average town, USA. Nothing scandalous. She chewed on the inside of her cheek. Harlow Bend is quiet. We like it quiet. People here, they value their privacy. They value their traditions. I'm not here to dig up dirt, Eli lied. He was always here to dig up dirt. That was the job. Just atmosphere. Careful what atmosphere you breathe in, Mr. Warren, she said, stepping closer. The scent of ozone was stronger on her. Some air is toxic if you aren't used to it. Don't go poking around the old silos on the North Ridge. Structural instability. Dangerous. North Ridge? Got it. I'll steer clear. See that you do. She touched the brim of her hat. Night falls hard here. Best stay indoors after sundown. The coyotes, they get confused. They pack up. She turned and walked back to her cruiser. Eli watched her go. She hadn't blinked once during the entire conversation. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. The heat hadn't broken. If anything, it had intensified. The air conditioning unit in the window rattled and coughed, blowing lukewarm air that smelled of dust. He lay on top of the sheets, staring at the ceiling, listening. Without the headphones, he couldn't hear the heartbeat, but he could feel it. It was in the bed frame, in the floorboards, a rhythmic tremor. At 2 a.m., he gave up. He grabbed his field recorder and stepped outside. The motel parking lot was empty. The streetlights buzzed with dying sodium bulbs. He looked toward the north, toward the ridge the sheriff had warned him about. The sky in that direction was glowing. Not with city lights, the nearest city was 60 miles away, but with the flickering primal orange of bonfires. And there was sound. Eli hit record. He held the microphone high. it was chanting. Hundreds of voices, synchronized, drifting over the miles of corn. The language wasn't English. It was guttural, full of hard consonants and long, moaning vowels. It sounded like stones grinding together. It sounded like the earth itself trying to speak. Onta, raso, hel north. The rhythm sped up. The fires flared brighter, casting long, dancing shadows against the low-hanging clouds. Suddenly, his recorder screamed. A high-pitched feedback squeal that pierced his eardrums. He dropped the device. It hit the gravel with a crack. Eli fell to his knees, clutching his ears, the sound drilling into his brain. It wasn't just feedback. It was a voice, sped up and distorted, screaming a single message over and over in the chaotic noise. Then, silence. The fires on the ridge extinguished instantly, as if a giant hand had snuffed them out. The chanting stopped. Eli sat in the gravel, his heart hammering against his ribs. He reached for the recorder. The metal casing was burning hot, searing his fingertips. He hissed and dropped it again. The plastic display screen had melted, bubbling inward. He looked at the device, then out at the dark, silent cornfields. The corn stalks closest to the motel were swaying, though there was absolutely no wind. Part 2. The Silo Sermon. Sunday morning in Harlow Bend brought a sky the color of a bruise. The clouds were low and oppressive, a ceiling of slate gray that trapped the heat and the dust. Eli had slept fitfully, dreaming of being buried alive in a mountain of grain, the golden kernels filling his mouth, his nose, his lungs, until he became part of the harvest. He woke up with the taste of dirt in his mouth. Despite the destroyed recorder, he had backups. He always had backups. He loaded a smaller digital Sony recorder into his jacket pocket and a lapel mic clip. He needed to see who was behind the chanting. The town directory listed 3 churches, but only one had any activity, the First Light Tabernacle. The church sat on the edge of town, a stark white building that looked too large for the dwindling population. The architecture was severe Gothic revival, but stripped of ornamentation. No gargoyles, no stained glass, just clear, tall windows and a steeple that rose like a warning finger. The parking lot was full. Pickup trucks, sedans from the 80s, tractors. It seemed the entire town was here. Eli slipped in through the back doors just as the service was beginning. The interior was sweltering. There was no air conditioning, and the bodies packed into the pews generated a humid, sour warmth. But no one was fanning themselves. They sat rigid, shoulders touching, heads forward. The pulpit was a massive block of rough-hewn oak, dark and ancient. Behind it stood Pastor Gideon Hale. Hale was a striking man, tall, gaunt, with silver hair swept back from a high forehead. He wore a simple black suit that seemed to swallow the light, but it was his voice that captured Eli immediately. It was a baritone that resonated in the chest, smooth as oil, yet carrying an edge of jagged steel. "We do not look up for salvation," Hale said, his voice filling the room without the aid of a microphone. "For the sky is empty. The sky is a void of indifference." Eli leaned against the back wall, subtly checking that his recorder was running. The red light blinked steadily in his pocket. "We looked down," Hale continued, gripping the sides of the pulpit. His knuckles were white. "We looked to the root, to the soil that sustains, to the darkness that gestates the seed. For what is a seed but a burial? What is growth but a clawing escape from the grave?" "Amen," the congregation whispered. It wasn't a shout. It was a collective exhalation, a rustle of dry leaves. "They tell us the world is moving on." Hale's eyes scanned the room, and for a terrifying second, Eli felt them lock on to him. Those eyes were pale blue, almost white, like blind eyes that saw too much. "They tell us we are average. They tell us we are dying. But they do not know the compact. They do not know that the firmament is brittle, and we are the hammer." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried to the furthest corners of the room. The harvest is late because the offering is not yet prepared. We must pierce the firmament. We must make the sky bleed with truth. The roots are thirsty. Are you ready to water them? We are the water. The congregation responded in unison. Are you ready to be the grain? We are the grain. Then prepare for the threshing. The service ended not with a hymn, but with a minute of absolute silence. No coughing, no shuffling, just 400 people holding their breath as the crowd filed out. Eli slipped away, his skin crawling. This wasn't Christianity. It wasn't any denomination he recognized. It was a death cult wrapped in agricultural metaphors. He spent the afternoon doing recon. He drove his Volvo out toward the North Ridge, parking a mile away from the structure he had seen on the map. The sheriff had warned him away, which meant it was exactly where he needed to go. He hiked through the cornfields. The stalks were 7 feet tall, enclosing him in a tunnel of dry vegetation. The ground was uneven, hard-packed dirt that cracked under his boots. He kept hearing rustling parallel to his movement. Whenever he stopped, the rustling stopped. Just animals, he told himself. Just the wind. But there was no wind. He emerged from the corn into a clearing. There it stood, the derelict grain silo. It was a titan of rusted corrugated steel, rising 100 feet into the air. Beside it was the skeletal remains of a barn. This was the source of the chanting. Eli crouched in the edge of the corn, pulling out his camera with a telephoto lens. He brought the viewfinder to his eye. The ground around the silo had been stripped of all grass. The dirt was scorched black. Carved into the hard earth were concentric circles, vast and precise, radiating out from the silo's base. He zoomed in. In the grooves of the circles, things were placed. Bones. Not just animal bones, he saw the distinct shape of a deer skull, but other things. A rusted carburetor, a child's doll head missing, patches of what looked like dried skin, and in the center, right at the metal door of the silo, was a fresh stain, dark, coagulated red. Eli snapped photos, the shutter click sounding like a gunshot in the silence. He panned up the side of the silo. About 50 feet up, someone had painted a symbol in white, a circle with 3 wavy lines descending from it, like roots or perhaps tentacles. He lowered the camera. He needed to get closer. He needed a sample of that soil. He took a step forward, and the ground crunched loudly. From the dark opening of the silo door, a figure emerged. It was Hale. He was wearing overalls now, shirtless underneath, his pale skin glistening with sweat and grease. He held a long, curved scythe in his hand. He didn't look around. He looked straight at the patch of corn where Eli was hiding. The witness acts as the lens, Hale called out, his voice conversational. But the lens must not crack before the image is captured. Eli froze. He was 50 yards away, well hidden. There was no way Hale could see him. Hale raised the scythe and pointed it at the sky. Go back to your little box, Mr. Warren. The sermon isn't for you. Not yet. Eli didn't wait. He turned and bolted back into the corn, crashing through the stalks, not caring about the noise. He ran until his lungs burned, until he reached the car. He fumbled with his keys, hands shaking. He jammed the key into the ignition and turned it click, 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 dead. Come on, he pleaded, slamming his hand on the steering wheel. Don't do this. He tried again. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. Outside, the sun was setting. The shadows of the cornstalks lengthened, turning into grasping fingers that reached for the car. Eli locked the doors. He checked his phone. No signal. He looked in the rearview mirror. In the distance, standing at the edge of the road where the corn met the gravel, stood a row of people. They were just silhouettes against the dying light. They weren't moving, they were just watching. And then, rhythmically, they began to sway. Left, right, mimicking the corn. Eli tried the ignition one last time. The engine roared to life. He didn't question it. He threw the car into gear, spun the tires in the gravel, and sped away, watching the swaying figures shrink in the red glow of his taillights. Part 3. The Missing. The diner was called Sally's, though the sign was missing the S and the Y, leaving it simply as All. Eli sat in a booth at the back, nursing a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. It was Monday. He hadn't slept. He had spent the night barricaded in his motel room, listening to the walls. The heartbeat had returned, stronger this time. It rattled the water glass on his nightstand. He had his laptop open, scrolling through digital archives of the Harlow Bend Gazette. The Wi-Fi was excruciatingly slow, but he had found a pattern. Every 7 years, there was a spike in accidental deaths and missing persons reports. Farm accidents, runaways, drifters passing through who never passed out. "You're reading about the harvest cycle," a voice said. Eli looked up. A waitress stood there. She looked to be in her late 20s, with dark circles under her eyes and a nervous tremor in her hands. Her name tag read, "Mara." "I'm reading about missing people, Mara," Eli said quietly. "A lot of them." She looked around the diner. It was mostly empty, save for 2 farmers eating pie in silence near the front. She slid into the booth opposite him. "You're the radio guy," she whispered. "The one asking questions. I'm Eli. And yes, I have questions." "You need to leave," Mara said. Her eyes were wide, frantic. "My brother, Tom, he joined them 3 years ago. The congregation. Hale's church?" "It's not a church," she hissed. "It's a feeder system. Tom, he was depressed. Hale promised him purpose. Said the town was special. Said we were guardians of the gateway." "Gateway to what?" "To the under," she said, her voice trembling. "They believe the soil here is thin, that there's something beneath the crust, something old. Hale says we have to keep it asleep, or we have to wake it up. The doctrine changes depending on the moon. What happened to Tom?" Mara looked down at her hands. He started talking about the binding, about how his blood was too thick and needed to be thinned. He stopped coming home. "One night, I went to the silo. I saw them." She leaned in, her voice barely audible. "They were burying him, but he wasn't dead. He was planted. They buried him up to his neck in the center of the circle. Hale was pouring something into his mouth, a black sludge." Tom was screaming, but it sounded like joy. Eli felt a chill ripple through him. "Did you go to the police, Sheriff Burns?" Mara laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Carol Burns is Hale's sister-in-law. Her husband was the deacon before he ascended 5 years ago. There is no police here, Mr. Warren. There's only the congregation." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because the cycle is ending," Mara said. "Hale says the crossing is near. Tonight, the moon is blood. They're going to open it. And let them take anyone else. I know where the old tunnels are. The mining shafts from the 1800s. They run right under the silo." "Show me," Eli said. "If I show you, you have to promise to get the evidence out. To bring the National Guard, or the FBI, or goddamn anyone." "I promise." The sky outside began to darken rapidly. It was only 4 p.m., but storm clouds, black, anvil-shaped monsters were rolling in from the west. The air pressure dropped so sharply Eli's ears popped. "It's starting," Mara whispered. Suddenly, the lights in the diner flickered and died. The hum of the refrigerator cut out. The silence rushed in. From outside, the civil defense siren began to wail. But it wasn't the steady tone of a tornado warning. It was a modulated, rising and falling pitch that sounded almost like a melody. "Woo-ah! Woo-ah!" That's not the storm siren, Eli said, grabbing his gear. No, Mara stood up, grabbing a steak knife from the table and shoving it into her apron pocket. That's the call to prayer. Part 4, Under the Fields. The storm unleashed a torrent of rain that smelled of sulfur. Lightning flashed in strobe light bursts, illuminating the swaying cornfields in stark monochrome. Eli and Mara drove in the Volvo, headlights cutting through the deluge. Mara directed him away from the main road, down a muddy tractor path that wound behind the abandoned textile mill. Here, she said. The old mine entrance is behind those briars. They got out. The rain soaked them instantly. Eli shielded his recorder under his jacket, though he doubted it would matter. The air itself felt electrically charged. They fought through the thicket until they found it, a boarded-up drift shaft, the wood rotted and soft. Eli kicked the planks in. A blast of cold, stale air hit them. It smelled of wet earth, and something sweet like rotting fruit. Flashlights, Eli said, handing one to Mara. They descended. The tunnel was shored up with ancient timbers that groaned under the weight of the earth above. The walls were rough-hewn stone, dripping with moisture. These mines were closed in 1902, Mara whispered, her beam cutting the darkness. They hit a pocket of gas that drove 12 men insane. They killed each other with pickaxes. That's the official story. And the unofficial one? They found the root system. They walked for 20 minutes, descending deeper. The air grew warmer. The walls changed from stone to packed earth. And then, the earth began to change. Embedded in the dirt walls were stalks of wheat, not growing, but pressed into the soil like fossils. As they went deeper, the wheat became denser until the walls looked like they were woven from dead grain. Do you hear that? Eli stopped. A sound echoed through the vents. Whispers, thousands of them. It sounded like the friction of dry stalks rubbing together, but formed into words. Feed, hunger, open. It's the vent system from the silo, Mara said, pointing to a rusted grate overhead. We're directly beneath them. They entered a large chamber. Eli swept his light across the room and gasped. The floor was patterned. Concentric circles dug into the earth, and in the circles were there were dozens of them. Shriveled, desiccated bodies, their skin pulled tight over bones like parchment. They were arranged in sitting positions, facing the center. Their mouths were forced open, stuffed to overflowing with bundles of black wheat. Oh God, Mara gagged, covering her mouth. That's Mr. Henderson. He disappeared last week. Eli forced himself to look. He raised his camera and started recording video. This is a mass grave. No, Mara said, stepping closer to one of the bodies. She touched the arm of the corpse. It's a battery. The corpse's arm moved. Eli jumped back. The dry skin crackled. The head of Mr. Henderson turned slowly, the neck snapping with the sound of dry wood. The eyes were gone, replaced by sockets packed with grain seeds. A rustling sound filled the chamber. It came from the shadows in the far corner. It wasn't the sound of a human. It was the sound of 1,000 legs skittering. Something's here, Eli whispered. The Guardian, Mara said, backing away. Hale said something watches the roots. From the darkness, a shape emerged. It was vaguely humanoid, but made of woven plant matter, soil, and bone. It stood 7 feet tall. Where a face should be, there was only a vertical slit that dripped a thick amber sap. It didn't walk. It shambled, the sound of breaking twigs accompanying every movement. Run, Eli said. They scrambled back toward the tunnel. The creature let out a sound, a blast of air through hollow reeds, a dissonance that made Eli's vision blur. He felt blood trickle from his nose. They sprinted through the dark, the creature crashing behind them. The tunnel shook. Dirt rained down. The supports are giving way, Mara screamed. They dove through a narrow passage just as the main chamber collapsed behind them with a roar that shook the fillings in Eli's teeth. They were trapped in the upper shaft, dust choking them. "We can't go back that way," Eli coughed. "There's another exit," Mara said, wiping mud from her face. "It comes up in the storm cellar of the old parsonage, Hale's house." Part 5, Voices on the Air. They emerged into the storm cellar of a Victorian house, pushing up through a hidden trap door. The house was empty, but it hummed with energy. Outside, the storm had stopped, replaced by an eerie, yellowish fog. Eli checked his gear. The camera was intact. He had the footage. "We need to broadcast this. Now, is there a radio station in town?" "WHB 104.5, Mara said. "Just off Main Street. It's automated, mostly." They stole a truck from the parsonage driveway. Keys were in the ignition, as if expecting them, and drove to the station. The streets were deserted. No, not deserted. People were standing in their yards, motionless, looking up at the sky. They reached the small radio station building. Eli kicked the door in. He knew the board. It was an old analog setup. He fired up the transmitter, overriding the automated playlist of country hits. "Okay," Eli said, plugging his recorder into the auxiliary input. "I'm going to loop the audio of the chanting, and I'm going to describe what we saw. If anyone is listening outside this hellhole, they'll hear it." He flipped the switch to on-air. The on-air light flickered red. "This is Eli Warren," he spoke into the studio mic. "I am broadcasting from Harlow Bend. This is an emergency. The town it's a killing field. There is a cult operating under the guise of the First Light Tabernacle. We have found bodies." He played the audio of the chanting he recorded earlier. Suddenly, the speakers in the studio screeched. Eli's voice was cut off. A new voice boomed through the monitors. It was Hale. "My dear Mr. Warren, you try to shout above the thunder? You are but a cricket. He's hijacking the signal." Eli frantically worked the knobs. "He's got a stronger transmitter." "The citizens of the Bend." Hale's voice was smooth, intoxicating. "The time of the husk is over. The kernel must break. Do not fear the tearing. It is the only way to grow." Through the studio window, Eli saw the people in the street drop to their knees. They began to convulse, not in pain, but in ecstasy. "Look." Mara pointed to the monitors showing the exterior security cameras. In the distance, across the farmlands, fires were igniting. But they weren't random. They were precise lines of flame burning through the corn. From the aerial view, they formed a shape, a sigil, the same one on the silo. "It's a summoning circle," Mara whispered. "The whole town is the circle." Eli grabbed a portable shortwave radio from his bag. He tuned through the frequencies, every channel, AM, FM, shortwave, even the weather band was broadcasting Hale's breathing. "He's not just using a transmitter," Eli said, his face pale. "He's using the earth. The ground is conductive. The whole town is an antenna." Mara's phone buzzed. A text message. She looked at it and screamed. She showed the screen to Eli. There was a picture of her house, engulfed in flames. The text read, "The field is open. Come home, Mara." "They're burning it," she sobbed. "My memories. Everything. We have to go to the silo," Eli said, a grim determination settling over him. "That's the eye of the storm. If we stop Hale, we stop the signal." "We can't stop him," Mara said. "He has the whole town. We have this." Eli held up his recorder. "I have a recording of the creature's sound, the dissonance. If I can play that back, amplified, maybe it disrupts their rhythm. Maybe it breaks the trance." It was a long shot, a suicidal shot. "Let's go," Mara said, gripping the knife in her pocket. Part 6, The Awakening. They drove toward the silo. The fog was so thick the headlights simply illuminated a wall of white, but they didn't need to see. They followed the vibration. The car shook violently. The road beneath them was rippling, like water disturbed by a stone. They reached the clearing. it was transformed. The silo had split open. The metal sides had peeled back like a banana skin. Rising from the center was a column of writhing, black darkness, a pillar of shadow that stretched up into the clouds. Surrounding it were the townspeople. Hundreds of them. They stood in concentric rings, holding hands. Their eyes were completely black, leaking a thick golden fluid wheat sap. Hale stood on a raised platform of earth near the silo's maw. He looked radiant, his skin glowing with a faint phosphorescence. Eli and Mara exited the truck. The sound was deafening, a roar deeper than thunder, vibrating the fluid in their inner ears. Hale saw them. He smiled. "The witness arrives," Hale bellowed, his voice amplified by the air itself. "And the guide! Welcome to the harvest!" "Shut it down, Hale!" Eli shouted, though his voice sounded tiny. He fumbled with his gear, hooking the recorder into a portable megaphone speaker he had in the trunk. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. "Shut it down?" Hale laughed. "You cannot shut down a season, Mr. Warren. You cannot vote against the winter. This is the natural order. We have fed the roots for a century, and now the tree blooms." The ground lurched. Eli was thrown to his knees. Visions flooded his mind. He wasn't on a farm anymore. He was standing on a plain of black glass, under a sky filled with writhing tendrils of nebulous light. He saw colossal entities, vast as mountains, walking on legs of woven starlight. He smelled ozone and ancient rot. The old ones, his mind screamed. The things that live in the gaps between seconds. "Eli," Mara slapped him, snapping him back to reality. "Play the sound." Eli hit play on the recorder, holding the megaphone up. The screech of the creature, the dissonant blast of air, erupted. It cut through the chanting. The townspeople flinched. The rhythm broke. For a second, the pillar of darkness wavered. Hale's face twisted in fury. "You pollute the holy frequency," he gestured, and the ground beneath Eli and Mara erupted. Vines thick, thorny, and pulsing with blood shot out of the dirt. They wrapped around Eli's legs, dragging him down. "No!" Mara slashed at them with her knife, severing a vine that sprayed hot red liquid. "The silo," Mara yelled. "We have to close the gate. There's a reversal. The old prayer book in the parsonage. I memorized the seal." "Say it," Eli screamed, struggling against the vines. "It needs a sacrifice." Mara looked at the silo, then at Eli. "It needs a life given freely, not taken." The roar from the silo grew louder. A massive limb, wet, slick, and covered in eyes, began to pull itself out of the hole. Part 7, The Earth Opens. "Mara, don't!" Eli yelled. Mara looked at him. Her face was calm, terrified, but resolved. "It's the only way, Eli. Record it. Make sure they know." She turned and ran toward the silo. "Stop her!" Hale shrieked. He leaped from the platform, his human guise failing, his jaw unhinged, revealing rows of needle teeth. Mara didn't stop. She sprinted through the rings of the congregation. They tried to grab her, but the dissonance Eli was still broadcasting kept them disoriented. She reached the edge of the pit. The heat was blistering. The entity was halfway out, a mass of roiling flesh and plant matter, the size of a skyscraper. Mara began to chant. It was the reverse of the sounds Eli had heard on the tape. High, sharp syllables. Kelnath, Rassel, Onta. The entity shrieked. The pillar of shadow began to spin violently. Hale tackled Mara. They rolled in the dirt at the edge of the abyss. Hale was strong, unnatural, but Mara was fighting with the desperation of the damned. She stabbed the knife into Hale's shoulder. He didn't even flinch. He grabbed her throat. "You are nothing," Hale roared. "Compost!" Eli broke free of the vines. He ran forward, wielding the heavy shotgun microphone like a club. He swung it with all his might, smashing it into Hale's head. Hale staggered back, releasing Mara. "Finish it!" Eli screamed. Mara scrambled to her knees. She looked into the abyss. She shouted the final syllable, "Vuk." A blinding white light exploded from the silo. The ground turned to liquid. The entity let out a sound of frustration, a low frequency that shattered the windows of every car in the lot. It began to be sucked back down, but the suction was immense. It pulled everything with it. The dirt, the corn, the silo itself began to implode. Hale screamed as the earth swallowed him. He was dragged down, clawing at the mud. "Eli, run!" Mara shouted. The ground beneath her was crumbling. "Take my hand." Eli reached out. Their fingers brushed, but the pull was too strong. Mara looked at him one last time. "Tell them," she mouthed. Then she let go. She fell backward into the blinding light, into the churning earth. The implosion accelerated. The shockwave hit Eli, throwing him backward 100 feet. He landed hard in the cornfield, darkness claiming him. Part 8. The last transmission. FEMA incident report. #4 9 Twat B location. Harlow Bend. Quarantined. Level 5 hazard date. November 14th. Geological survey indicates a localized sinkhole event of unprecedented magnitude. The town of Harlow Bend has effectively ceased to exist. 90% of structures were swallowed by the earth. Soil samples indicate high levels of unknown radiation and biological contaminants not consistent with terrestrial flora. No survivors found. The internet found the file 2 weeks later. It was uploaded to a dark web server, then mirrored to Reddit, then YouTube. It was titled The Harlow Tape.wave. It was 93 minutes long. Most of it was garbage, static, wind noise, the sound of a car engine. But the last 10 minutes were clear. It was the sound of a man breathing heavily. Then, a voice. Eli Warren. "My name is Eli Warren. I was a journalist. If you are hearing this, do not come to Harlow Bend. It's gone, but it's not gone." There was a pause, the sound of shifting dirt. "I'm trapped. I think I'm in the grain store, or what's left of it. My legs. I can't feel my legs." Static. Mara saved us. She closed the door, but she didn't lock it. "You can't lock it. It's just waiting. The soil, it's moving. It's knitting itself back together." A sound of coughing. Wet, rattling coughs. "I can hear them. The congregation. They aren't dead. They're down here with me in the walls. I can hear them rustling. They are becoming the roots." The audio quality degraded. A low hum began to rise in the background. That same 18 hertz thrum. "It's still talking," Eli whispered, his voice trembling. "Beneath the dirt. It's still hungry. It knows I'm here. It's keeping me alive. It wants a witness." The hum grew louder, overpowering his voice. "Don't eat the bread," Eli gasped. "Don't eat the..." The audio cut off mid-breath. 3 months later, a construction crew was working on the perimeter fence of the exclusion zone, 10 miles south of where Harlow Bend used to be. "Hey, boss!" one of the workers shouted, pointing at the ground. Half buried in the mud was a small, plastic object, a portable radio. The red power light was faintly flickering, defying all logic of battery life. The foreman picked it up. It was broadcasting static. He held it to his ear. Through the white noise, a voice, dry as dead leaves, murmured a single word: "Harvest." The foreman dropped the radio. He looked at his hand. Where he had touched the plastic, a small, green shoot of wheat was growing out of his fingertip, piercing the skin, reaching for the sun. He tried to brush it off, but it wouldn't move. It was rooted in his bone. From the barren fields beyond the fence, the wind picked up, and in the rustle of the dead grass, thousands of voices whispered, "Welcome." The foreman, whose name was Jim Miller, stumbled back from the perimeter fence, his boots sliding in the slick, unnaturally gray mud. The wind didn't just carry the whisper, It pressed against him, a physical weight that smelled of ozone and dry, dusty granaries. He scrambled toward his pickup truck, parked 50 yards away on the gravel access road. The rest of the crew was further down the line, dismantling a section of the old highway guardrail. They hadn't heard it. They hadn't seen the radio. Jim slammed the truck door and locked it. His breath fogged the windows instantly. He looked at his left hand. The index finger was throbbing, a dull, rhythmic ache that synced with his own heartbeat. The green shoot was about an inch long now. It wasn't just piercing the skin, it had fused with the cuticle. He grabbed a pair of rusty pliers from the dashboard. His hands shook violently. "Just a weed," he muttered, his voice cracking. "Just a spore. Some kind of fungal infection." He clamped the pliers onto the base of the wheat stalk and pulled. He expected pain. He expected the sharp sting of tearing flesh. Instead, he felt a deep, sickening tug in his elbow. The root didn't end at the fingertip. It ran up his forearm, wrapped around the ulnar nerve like a second nervous system. As he pulled, the skin on his wrist rippled. A sound filled the cab, not a scream from his throat, but a high-pitched tea kettle whine coming from the wheat stalk itself. Jim dropped the pliers. He gagged, clutching his arm. Where he had tugged the stalk, the skin of his finger had split. There was no blood. Beneath the dermis, the meat of his finger was gone. In its place was dark, rich soil, packed tight, held together by a complex web of white, thread-like roots. The radio, which he had thrown onto the passenger seat, crackled to life again. The static resolved into a wet, rhythmic sound. Chewing. "The soil is ready," the voice whispered. It wasn't Eli's voice anymore. It was something older, a composite of 1,000 throats rubbing together. "The vessel is willing." "I'm not willing," Jim hissed, starting the engine. "I'm not willing." He threw the truck into gear, tires spinning on the gravel. He needed to get to the decontamination unit at Sector 4. The government guys in the hazmat suits, they would know what to do. They would cut it off. He didn't care if they took the whole arm. As he sped toward the command post, the radio's volume knob turned on its own. The plastic clicked, slowly, all the way to the maximum. "Jim," the voice said. It knew his name. "Do not go to the burning men. They do not understand the cycle. They only know the ash." Jim swerved, nearly hitting a concrete barrier. "Shut up!" He reached over to smash the radio, but his left hand, the infected one, wouldn't move. It remained resting on his thigh, fingers drumming a complex, staccato rhythm against his jeans. He stared at the hand in horror. It wasn't paralyzed. It was ignoring him. The fingers were moving with a dexterity he didn't possess, tapping out a code. Tap, tap, scrape. Tap, tap, scrape. Outside the windshield, the landscape was changing. It was subtle at first. The floodlights that illuminated the exclusion zone perimeter were flickering. The light they cast wasn't the harsh white of halogen anymore. It was a sickly amber, like sunlight filtering through a beer bottle. Jim reached Sector 4. The decontamination station was a massive inflatable tent surrounded by military Humvees. Soldiers stood guard, faces obscured by gas masks. He slammed on the brakes and bailed out of the truck, cradling his left arm. "Help!" he screamed, running toward the checkpoint. "I have been exposed. I touched something." 2 soldiers raised their rifles immediately. "Halt. Get on the ground." "Look at my hand," Jim yelled, holding it up. The wheat stalk waved in the stagnant air, taller now, the tip beginning to swell into a kernel head. The soldiers hesitated. One of them keyed a shoulder mic. "Command, we have a breach at Gate North. Subject is exhibiting biological anomaly." "Shoot him!" The radio in the truck cab behind Jim blared. It was loud enough that the soldiers heard it. They flinched, looking past Jim at the empty truck. "I didn't say that," Jim pleaded. "It's the radio. It's in the truck," "Step away from the vehicle," the lead soldier commanded. Suddenly, the ground beneath Jim's boots felt hot. Not warm hot. Steam began to hiss from the mud around the tires of his truck. The seed must travel. The truck's speakers boomed, overriding the radio. The wind is too slow. Jim's left hand shot up, grabbing his own throat. He choked, clawing at his face with his free hand. The infected arm was impossibly strong. The fingers dug into his windpipe, the wheat stalk tickling his chin. The soldiers opened fire. Bullets struck the mud around him. One hit Jim in the shoulder, spinning him around. He didn't feel pain. He felt expansion. Where the bullet entered, it didn't punch a hole. It triggered a bloom. Instantaneously, a burst of black wheat erupted from the gunshot wound, feeding on the kinetic energy and the sudden release of blood. The stalks shot out 3 feet in a second, weaving together into a dense, protective mat. Jim fell to his knees, gasping. He wasn't controlling his body anymore. He was a passenger in a vehicle that was being retrofitted while speeding down the highway. "Burn it," the soldier screamed. "Flamethrower team, now!" A stream of liquid fire arced through the night air. It hit Jim and the truck. Jim screamed, but the scream shifted halfway through. As the flames licked his skin, the soil inside him hardened. The wheat on his shoulder didn't burn to ash. It blackened and hardened into carbon fiber needles. The fire wasn't destroying the infection, it was tempering it. He stood up inside the inferno. His clothes were gone. His skin was sloughing off in wet sheets, revealing the truth beneath. He was no longer a man made of meat and bone. He was a wicker man of root and stone, a golem of the harvest. Through the roaring flames, Jim's eyes, now solid black orbs, leaking golden sap, locked onto the soldier with the flamethrower. He opened his mouth, and a cloud of spores, glowing with bioluminescent rot, puffed out. "Thank you for the heat," Jim's voice boomed, distorted by a larynx made of wood. The winter was so cold. He took a step forward. The flames died down, absorbed into his porous form. He swept his arm, the one with the wheat stalk, which was now a 3-foot blade of obsidian-sharp grain, and slashed the air. A shockwave of force knocked the soldiers flat. The ground ripple effect that had destroyed Harlow Bend was happening here, 10 miles away. The asphalt of the command post cracked. From the fissures, hands emerged. Not human hands, hands made of woven corn husks. They grabbed the ankles of the fallen soldiers. Inside the command tent, 40 yards away, Dr. Eris Thorne watched the monitor feeds turn to static. She was the CDC lead for the containment protocol. She had watched the drone footage of Eli Warren's final moments. She knew what this was. "Vent the tanks," she said into her headset, her voice trembling but clinical. "Protocol 9. Flood the sector with herbicide and napalm. Total saturation." "Dr. Thorne, our men are out there," the colonel beside her shouted. "Your men are already fertilizer, Colonel," Thorne said, typing a code into her terminal. "If that thing gets past the perimeter, it hits the water table. If it hits the water table, it hits the Mississippi. If it hits the river, the Midwest is gone in 48 hours. She hit enter. Klaxons began to wail. High-pressure jets positioned along the perimeter fence spun to life, but instead of the hiss of chemical spray, there was a grinding noise. Thorne looked at the pressure gauges. 0. "The lines are clogged," the colonel said, tapping the glass. Thorne looked at the camera feed from the chemical tanks. The massive steel drums were bulging. They weren't full of herbicide anymore. They were pulsing. The steel split open. A slurry of thick, black sludge poured out, smelling of yeast and old blood. "It's in the infrastructure," Thorne whispered. It traveled through the pipes. The door to the command trailer buckled. A dent appeared in the heavy metal, shaped like a fist. Bang. "It's here." The colonel drew his sidearm. Bang. The metal tore open. Standing in the doorway was Jim Miller, or the thing that used to be Jim. He was 7 feet tall now, his body a twisted lattice of charred roots and gleaming wheat. The radio was fused into his chest, pulsing with a red light like a second heart. The radio spoke, using Eli Warren's stolen voice. Dr. Thorne, we have listened to your broadcasts. You talk of containment, but you cannot contain the Earth. You can only be buried in it. The colonel fired. The bullets embedded in Jim's chest, only to be pushed back out by writhing tendrils. Jim raised a hand. The floor of the trailer, metal reinforced with steel beams, groaned. Wheat stalks punched through the floor tiles, wrapping around the colonel's legs, dragging him down. He screamed as he was pulled through the floor, the metal bending like wet cardboard. Thorne backed against the server banks. She grabbed a flare gun from the emergency kit. "What do you want?" she demanded. The entity tilted its head. The sap, leaking from its eyes, sizzled on the floor. "We want to tell you a story," the radio crackled. "A story about a town that went to sleep, and a world that needs to wake up. We need a new frequency, a louder one." Thorne realized with horror what they meant. The command trailer, it wasn't just a shelter. It was equipped with a satellite uplink to the Pentagon and the emergency alert system. "No," she gasped. She lunged for the server kill switch. A vine shot from Jim's palm, piercing her hand, pinning it to the wall. Thorne shrieked. Jim stepped closer. The smell was overpowering, sweet, rotting fermentation. He reached out with a finger that ended in a USB connector fused with organic nerve endings. He didn't want to kill her. He wanted the console. He jammed the finger into the port on the main terminal. The screens flared white. Text began to scroll across the monitors at impossible speeds. Not code, not English. Geometric patterns, sigils. The satellite dish on the roof of the trailer began to rotate, aligning with a point in the sky directly above the ruins of Harlow Bend. Thorne watched the upload progress bar. Uplink established. Global emergency broadcast system. Carrier wave upload in progress. "You are going to broadcast the signal," Thorne wheezed, fighting the shock. "To everyone." "Not a signal," the entity corrected. "A seed. Sound is vibration. Vibration is touch. Within the hour, every speaker, every earbud, every television in the hemisphere will carry the frequency. We will plant the garden in their minds." Thorne looked at the flare gun in her free hand. She couldn't stop the upload. The system was locked out. But the oxygen tanks for the trailer's life support system were right next to the server rack. "Harvest this," she spat. She raised the flare gun and fired, not at the monster, but at the oxygen regulators. The flare hit the valve. The compressed oxygen exploded, mixing with the flare's magnesium burn. The trailer detonated. Part 9. The White Noise. Washington, D.C., 48 hours later. The briefing room was silent. The president sat at the head of the table, his face gray. "Report," he said. General Vance stood up. He didn't look at the president. He looked at the map on the wall. The Midwest was gone. A black circle, 300 miles wide, covered Missouri, Kansas, and parts of Illinois. "The explosion at the containment site failed to stop the transmission, sir," Vance said. It amplified it. The fire created a thermal column that carried the spores into the upper atmosphere. The jet stream took it from there." "And the broadcast?" "The EAS was hijacked for 12 seconds before we cut the hard lines," Vance said. "But 12 seconds was enough." "Enough for what?" Vance pressed a button on the remote. A video played on the main screen. It was CCTV footage from a subway station in New York City. Commuters were standing on the platform. The digital ad screens flickered. For a moment, the image of a concentric circle appeared. A sound played a low thrum. The people on the platform stopped moving. In perfect unison, they turned to face the tunnel. Then, they began to open their mouths. "We have reports from London, Tokyo, and Moscow," Vance said, his voice devoid of hope. "It's the same everywhere. People are stopping. They are walking into fields, into parks, into gardens. They are digging holes with their bare hands and burying themselves. The president stood up, walking to the window. Outside, the White House lawn was lush. Green. Too green. The grass was knee-high, swaying without wind. "Is there a cure?" the president asked. "No, sir," Vance said. "It's not a disease. It's a terraforming event. We aren't the dominant species anymore. We are the nutrients." The president looked down at his desk. His pen was vibrating. Thrum, thrum. He looked at the phone. The line was dead, but the speakerphone light was blinking. He picked up the receiver. Static. And then a voice that sounded like his own, but younger, hollower. "Mr. President," the voice said, "the field is open. Why do you resist? The roots are so warm." The president dropped the phone. He looked at his hand. A small green shoot was pushing out from under his fingernail. He looked out the window again. The Washington Monument was cracking. Vines as thick as redwood trees were crushing the stone, spiraling upward, turning the obelisk into a massive stalk of black wheat. The sky above the Capitol turned a bruised purple. The clouds began to swirl, forming the shape of a giant eye. From the speakerphone, the voice whispered one final command, echoed by the millions of people currently burying themselves in the dirt across the globe. "Grow." The command "grow" did not echo. It didn't bounce off the walls of the Oval Office, because the walls were no longer plaster and drywall. They were breathing. The silk wallpaper had gained a texture like moss, damp and cool, absorbing the terrified gasps of the only man left in the room who was still, strictly speaking, human. General Vance stumbled back, his boots crunching on the Persian rug that was rapidly dissolving into a bed of dark, fibrous mulch. "Mr. President," Vance choked out, his hand fumbling for the sidearm he had never thought he'd have to use in this room. The thing behind the resolute desk did not look up. The man who had been the leader of the free world was hunched over, his hands planted deep into the mahogany surface of the desk, not resting on it, but in it. His fingers had elongated, turning into gnarled, pale roots that dove into the wood, fusing flesh with furniture. The transformation was silent and terrifyingly fast. The president's gray hair was falling out in clumps, replaced instantly by fine, swaying filaments of black silk, corn silk. "Do not fight it, General," the president murmured. His voice was thick, as if his throat were filled with wet clay. He raised his head. Vance retched. The president's eyes were gone. In the sockets sat two perfect, golden kernels of wheat, rotating slowly, tracking movement without sight. It is inevitable. The economy of flesh is over. The economy of the harvest begins. Vance drew his weapon. "Sir, step away from the desk." The president smiled, and his skin split at the cheeks, revealing not muscle but the intricate woven lattice of a wicker basket. "I cannot. I am the desk. I am the floor. I am the root." A sudden cracking sound from the ceiling made Vance look up. The historic chandelier, heavy with crystal, was swaying. Vines, thick as pythons and black as oil, were bursting through the intricate crown molding. They didn't fall. They slithered, seeking heat, seeking the general. Vance turned and ran. He sprinted through the doorway, past the Secret Service agents stationed in the hall. They were standing at attention, perfectly still. "Move! We need to evacuate," Vance screamed, grabbing the shoulder of the lead agent. The agent didn't budge. Under the fabric of his dark suit, his body felt hard, rigid. Vance pulled his hand back. It was covered in a sticky, sweet-smelling sap. The agent's head tilted slowly to the side, the neck creaking like an old branch in a gale. "Welcome," the agent whispered, his lips not moving. Vance abandoned them. He ran toward the West Wing exit, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The air in the corridors was changing. It was getting hotter, humid, smelling of ozone and rapid fermentation. The portraits of past presidents on the walls were warping, the canvas bubbling as fungus bloomed from the painted eyes. He burst out onto the north lawn. He stopped, the breath torn from his lungs. Washington, D.C. was drowning, not in water, but in grain. The manicured lawns of the White House were gone. In their place was a sea of black wheat, 5 feet tall and rising visibly by the second. The stalks lashed back and forth, though there was no wind. They made a sound, a dry, rasping hiss that sounded like a million whispers overlapping. Beyond the fence, the city was screaming. Cars were swerving off the roads as drivers succumbed to the seizure-like commands of the broadcast. Pedestrians had stopped on the sidewalks, falling to their knees, digging into the concrete with bare, bloody hands, desperate to bury themselves before the transformation took hold. Vance saw the Marine One helicopter sitting on the pad, blades idling. The pilot was inside. "Go, go," Vance screamed, sprinting through the black wheat. The stalks slashed at his uniform, razor-sharp leaves cutting into his tactical pants. He felt a stinging sensation in his calf, a spore entering the bloodstream, but adrenaline pushed the pain aside. He reached the chopper and ripped the door open. "Get us in the air, Captain, now!" The pilot, helmet, visor down, nodded slowly. He didn't look at Vance. He simply pulled the collective. The turbine whined, and the bird lifted off. Vance collapsed into the jump seat, gasping for air, clutching his bleeding leg. He looked out the window as they ascended. The view was apocalyptic. The National Mall was a trench of darkness. The Lincoln Memorial was being strangled. Massive roots had erupted from the Potomac, wrapping around the white marble columns, crushing the monument into dust. The Washington Monument, as the president had seen, was now a jagged spire of obsidian organic matter, pulsing with a violet light that seemed to be broadcasting the signal further. "Get us to Andrews," Vance barked into the headset. "We need to get to the airborne command post. If we can get above the spore layer." He stopped. He noticed the pilot's hands on the cyclic stick. The gloves were gone. The pilot's hands were fused to the controls. Green veins pulsed under the skin, syncing with the rhythm of the rotor blades. "Captain," Vance whispered. The pilot turned his head. The visor was fogged up from the inside with green condensation. "There is no above, General." The pilot's voice came through the headset, distorted, layered with the sound of grinding stones. "The sky is just the ceiling of the greenhouse." Vance fumbled for his pistol again, but the seatbelt around his chest tightened. He looked down. It wasn't nylon webbing anymore. It was a vine erupting from the upholstery of the seat. It constricted, cracking a rib. "We are taking you to the silo," the pilot said. "You have strong bones, good for calcium. The mother needs calcium." Vance screamed as the vine wrapped around his throat. He fired the gun blindly into the cockpit. The windshield shattered. The pilot slumped forward, his head exploding in a spray of moss and sawdust. The helicopter banked violently to the left. It entered a spin. Through the shattered windshield, the ground rushed up to meet them, a waiting mouth of black, waving grain. Part 10. The Silent Frequency. 4 hours after the broadcast. Location: Chicago, Illinois. The world had not ended with a bang, but with a vibration. Lucas huddled in the corner of the freight elevator, clutching a crowbar he had scavenged from a janitor's closet. He was 30 years old, a graphic designer, and for the last 10 years, he had been profoundly deaf. He didn't know what the sound was. He didn't know about the thrum or the broadcast or the voice that told people to grow. He only knew that at 2 p.m., the vibration in the floor of his apartment building had changed. He usually felt the rhythm of the L train, the heavy bass of passing trucks, the slam of doors. But this was different. It was a constant, low-frequency shudder that made his teeth ache. Then, he had seen his roommate, Mike. Mike had been watching TV. Suddenly, Mike had stood up, his face slack, eyes wide and terrified. He had walked to the window on the 40th floor, and opened it. The agent didn't budge. Under the fabric of his dark suit, his body felt hard, rigid. Vance pulled his hand back. It was covered in a sticky, sweet-smelling sap. The agent's head tilted slowly to the side, the neck creaking like an old branch in a gale. "Welcome," the agent whispered, his lips not moving. Vance abandoned them. He ran toward the West Wing exit, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The air in the corridors was changing. It was getting hotter, humid, smelling of ozone and rapid fermentation. The portraits of past presidents on the walls were warping, the canvas bubbling as fungus bloomed from the painted eyes. He burst out onto the north lawn. He stopped, the breath torn from his lungs. Washington, D.C. was drowning, not in water, but in grain. The manicured lawns of the White House were gone. In their place was a sea of black wheat, 5 feet tall and rising visibly by the second. The stalks lashed back and forth, though there was no wind. They made a sound, a dry, rasping hiss that sounded like a million whispers overlapping. Beyond the fence, the city was screaming. Cars were swerving off the roads as drivers succumbed to the seizure-like commands of the broadcast. Pedestrians had stopped on the sidewalks, falling to their knees, digging into the concrete with bare, bloody hands, desperate to bury themselves before the transformation took hold. Vance saw the Marine One helicopter sitting on the pad, blades idling. The pilot was inside. "Go! Go!" Vance screamed, sprinting through the black wheat. The stalks slashed at his uniform, razor-sharp leaves cutting into his tactical pants. He felt a stinging sensation in his calf, a spore entering the bloodstream, but adrenaline pushed the pain aside. He reached the chopper and ripped the door open. "Get us in the air, Captain, now!" The pilot, helmet visor down, nodded slowly. He didn't look at Vance. He simply pulled the collective. The turbine whined, and the bird lifted off. Vance collapsed into the jump seat, gasping for air, clutching his bleeding leg. He looked out the window as they ascended. The view was apocalyptic. The National Mall was a trench of darkness. The Lincoln Memorial was being strangled. Massive roots had erupted from the Potomac, wrapping around the white marble columns, crushing the monument into dust. The Washington Monument, as the president had seen, was now a jagged spire of obsidian organic matter, pulsing with a violet light that seemed to be broadcasting the signal further. "Get us to Andrews," Vance barked into the headset. "We need to get to the airborne command post. If we can get above the spore layer." He stopped. He noticed the pilot's hands on the cyclic stick. The gloves were gone. The pilot's hands were fused to the controls. Green veins pulsed under the skin, syncing with the rhythm of the rotor blades. "Captain," Vance whispered. The pilot turned his head. The visor was fogged up from the inside with green condensation. "There is no above, General." The pilot's voice came through the headset, distorted, layered with the sound of grinding stones. "The sky is just the ceiling of the greenhouse." Vance fumbled for his pistol again, but the seatbelt around his chest tightened. He looked down. It wasn't nylon webbing anymore. It was a vine erupting from the upholstery of the seat. It constricted, cracking a rib. "We are taking you to the silo," the pilot said. "You have strong bones, good for calcium. The mother needs calcium." Vance screamed as the vine wrapped around his throat. He fired the gun blindly into the cockpit. The windshield shattered. The pilot slumped forward, his head exploding in a spray of moss and sawdust. The helicopter banked violently to the left. It entered a spin. Through the shattered windshield, the ground rushed up to meet them, a waiting mouth of black, waving grain. Part 10. The Silent Frequency. 4 hours after the broadcast. Location Chicago, Illinois. The world had not ended with a bang, but with a vibration. Lucas huddled in the corner of the freight elevator, clutching a crowbar he had scavenged from a janitor's closet. He was 30 years old, a graphic designer, and for the last 10 years he had been profoundly deaf. He didn't know what the sound was. He didn't know about the thrum or the broadcast or the voice that told people to grow. He only knew that at 2 p.m. the vibration in the floor of his apartment building had changed. He usually felt the rhythm of the L train, the heavy bass of passing trucks, the slam of doors. But this was different. It was a constant, low-frequency shudder that made his teeth ache. Then he had seen his roommate, Mike. Mike had been watching TV. Suddenly, Mike had stood up, his face slack, eyes wide and terrified. He had walked to the window on the 40th floor, and opened it. Lucas had shouted, signed, thrown a pillow. Mike hadn't reacted. Mike had simply climbed onto the ledge, looked back at Lucas with eyes that were rapidly turning entirely black, and stepped off. Lucas had run to the window, horrified, looking down. The street below wasn't a street anymore. The asphalt of Michigan Avenue had cracked open like an eggshell. Massive, writhing shapes were pushing up from the sewers. The people weren't running away. They were running toward the cracks. They were diving into the fissures. Lucas had grabbed his go bag and the crowbar and ran for the stairs. Now, hours later, he was stuck between floors in a service elevator that had died when the power grid failed. The silence was his normal, but the darkness was absolute. He clicked on his heavy-duty flashlight. The beam cut through the dust. The elevator car groaned. Lucas placed a hand on the metal wall. He felt it again. Thump, thump. Scrape. Something was moving in the shaft. Above him? Below him? He looked at the ceiling hatch of the elevator. It was slightly ajar. A long, thin tendril, pale white like a cave-dwelling worm, was lowering itself through the gap. It swayed back and forth, sensing the air. The end of the tendril wasn't a point. It was a small, wet bulb that looked disturbingly like a human ear. Lucas held his breath. He backed into the corner, raising the crowbar. The tendril dropped lower. It was hunting, not by sight, but by vibration, by the sound of a heartbeat. Lucas pressed his hand over his chest, trying to calm his heart. Don't move. Don't breathe. The tendril descended further, followed by another, and another. They were roots, but they moved with animal intelligence. Suddenly, the elevator cables above snapped. Not a clean break, a wet, tearing sound. The car dropped. Lucas was thrown upward, hitting the ceiling, then slammed to the floor as the emergency brakes kicked in with a screech of tearing metal. The jolt knocked the flashlight from his hand. It spun across the floor, the beam strobing wild shadows against the walls. In the flickering light, Lucas saw that the impact had jarred the doors open a few inches. Beyond the doors was the lobby, or what used to be the lobby. He crawled toward the gap, grabbing his light. He peered through. The marble floor of the high-rise lobby had become a swamp. The reception desk was an island covered in fungi the size of dinner plates, and standing in the center of the room were the residents. There were dozens of them. They stood in concentric circles, holding hands. Their clothes were tattered, ripped apart by the growth spurts of the flora erupting from their bodies. Their heads were tilted back, mouths open wide, facing the ceiling. From their mouths, thick stalks of wheat extended upward, weaving together into a canopy that blocked out the daylight from the glass entrance. They were swaying in unison. Lucas watched, paralyzed. He couldn't hear them, but he could feel the floor vibrating with their rhythm. They were chanting, a coordinated, structural resonance designed to bring the building down. He needed to get out. The building was being digested. He jammed the crowbar into the gap of the elevator doors and heaved. The metal groaned. The vibration in the floor stopped instantly. Every head in the lobby snapped down. Dozens of pairs of black, sap-leaking eyes locked onto the elevator doors. Lucas froze up. One of the figures, a woman in a torn business suit, her left arm now a massive wooden club, broke the circle. She took a step toward the elevator, then another. She opened her mouth, and Lucas saw the wheat stalk inside vibrate violently. She was screaming, A scream he couldn't hear, but one that shattered the glass of the directory case on the wall. Lucas didn't wait. He squeezed through the gap, ignoring the sharp metal tearing his jacket. He tumbled out onto the swampy floor of the lobby. The woman charged. She was fast, unnaturally fast. Lucas scrambled to his feet, slipping in the mud. He swung the flashlight beam into her eyes. She didn't flinch. She lunged, swinging the wooden club arm. Lucas ducked. The limb smashed into the wall above him, pulverizing the drywall. Dust and spores rained down. He swung the crowbar with both hands, striking her in the knee. It felt like hitting a tree trunk. The impact jarred his arms to the shoulder. The woman didn't fall. She looked down at her leg, where the bark skin was chipped, revealing raw red meat pulsing beneath the wood. She smiled a horrible, splitting expression. She reached out with her human hand and grabbed Lucas by the throat. He gagged, dropping the crowbar. Her grip was iron. She lifted him off the ground. She pulled him close. Her face was inches from his. The smell was suffocating rot, wet earth, and old blood. She moved her lips. Lucas, trained in lip reading since childhood, saw the words clearly. Why are you quiet? She squeezed. Lucas kicked his boots, connecting with her stomach. It was soft there. His heels sank in. She recoiled, dropping him. Lucas rolled, grabbed the crowbar, and didn't look back. He ran toward the revolving glass doors. They were blocked by thick vines. He smashed the glass with the crowbar. Once, twice. The safety glass shattered into diamonds. He burst out onto the street. The wind hit him. It wasn't the cold Chicago wind he knew. It was hot, carrying particles of ash and golden pollen. He looked up. The skyscrapers of Chicago were being connected. Massive bridges of organic matter vines, roots, solidified mud were spanning the gaps between the buildings. The city was being rewoven into a hive. And floating above the skyline, tethered by miles-long tendrils to the tallest towers, was a shape. It looked like a heart. A massive, beating heart, made of soil and shadow, suspended in the sky. It pulsed, sending shockwaves of purple light washing over the city. Lucas stared at it. He couldn't hear the hum, but he felt a trickle of blood run from his nose. The pressure was immense. He was alone in a world that had decided to wake up, and he was the only one who couldn't hear its morning prayer. He adjusted his grip on the crowbar, wiped the blood from his nose, and started running north toward the lake. Water. Plants drown in too much water. It was the only logic he had left. Part 11, the root cellar. Day 3. Location. Suburbs of Columbus, Ohio. The silence of the farmhouse was heavy, broken only by the scratching of a pen on paper. Reviewing the footage from the drone was getting harder. The screen of the ruggedized laptop was flickering, the battery dying. Sarah Finch. No, not Sarah. Sarah was gone. This was Dr. Elias Vance. No prompt. Banned Elias. This was Dr. Eris Thorne. She had survived the trailer explosion, just barely. Her left hand was bandaged, burnt, and useless. She sat in the storm cellar of an abandoned farmhouse, surrounded by cans of peaches and a shotgun with 4 shells left. She wasn't dead, but she was starting to wonder if she was the only one left who wasn't green. She hit play on the video file again. It was a recording from a traffic camera in London, captured just before the global internet collapsed completely. The footage showed Piccadilly Circus. The iconic screens were flashing the sigil, the concentric circles of the congregation. The people in the square weren't moving. They had formed a massive mound, a pile of bodies writhing together, fusing. From the center of the mound, a stalk had erupted. It grew hundreds of feet in seconds, piercing the clouds. Eris paused the video. She zoomed in on the base of the stalk. The faces of the people in the pile were still intact. They were asleep, dreaming, feeding the central structure, biomass. She whispered to the damp walls of the cellar, "It's repurposing biomass to build antennas." She coughed, A wet, rattling sound. She looked at the handkerchief. No blood, just black phlegm. She had inhaled the smoke at the trailer. She was infected. It was slow, thanks to the antifungal cocktail she had injected straight into her heart immediately after the blast. But it was happening. She could feel the roots in her lungs. They tickled when she breathed. Thump. Something hit the storm cellar doors above. Eris froze. She killed the light on the laptop. Scrape. Scrape. Hello? A voice called out. It sounded human. Male. Young. Is anyone down there? I saw a light. Eris grabbed the shotgun. She didn't answer. The mimics were getting better. Yesterday, she had heard her mother's voice calling from the cornfield. Her mother had been dead for 10 years. Please, the voice said, cracking with exhaustion. I'm not one of them. My name is Toby. I was on the highway. My car died. Aris aimed at the wooden steps leading up to the doors. Go away, she croaked. Silence. Then a sob. Please, it's getting dark. When the sun goes down, the scarecrows come off the poles. You know they do. Eris hesitated. The detail about the scarecrows, that was specific. The infected usually spoke in grand biblical metaphors about harvest and unity. They didn't talk about being afraid. She stood up, keeping the gun leveled. She reached up and unlatched the bolt. Show me your hands, she shouted. Stick them through the gap. 2 hands appeared in the crack between the cellar doors. They were dirty, covered in grease and dried blood, but the skin was pink. No green veins, no bark. The fingernails were chewed, not turning into roots. Aris exhaled. Okay, open it slowly. The doors creaked open. A young man, maybe 20, tumbled down the stairs. He was wearing a mechanic's jumpsuit that was too big for him. He looked at Eris, then at the gun, then collapsed, sitting on the bottom step. Thank God, he wept. Thank God. Close the door, Aris commanded. Toby scrambled back up and slammed the heavy wooden doors, bolting them shut. He slid down the wall, shaking uncontrollably. Water? He asked. Eris kicked a can of peaches toward him. Drink the syrup. I'm low on water. He ripped the lid off with trembling fingers and downed the juice. He wiped his mouth. I saw a combine harvester on the interstate, but there was no driver. It was made of meat, lady. The gears were bones. I know, Aris said, sitting back down at her laptop. The industrial integration phase. It's assimilating technology. Toby looked at her, eyes adjusting to the gloom. He saw the bandage on her hand. He saw the black veins creeping up her neck. He stiffened. You're sick. I'm managed, Eris said sharply, unlike the rest of the world. Where did you come from? Cleveland, Toby said. It's gone. The lake, it boiled. Huge steam clouds. Things walked out of the water. They looked like giant bundles of wheat, but walking on crab legs. The deep ones, Eris muttered, typing a note. Aquatic adaptation confirmed. Who are you? Toby asked. You talk like a scientist. I was the CDC lead, Eris said, not looking up. I'm the one who failed to stop it. Toby stared at her. You? You're the reason this happened? I'm the reason you're still alive to complain about it. Aris snapped. I triggered the fail-safe. It didn't work, but it slowed the assimilation in this sector. The fire confused the root network. She turned the laptop screen to him. Look at this. She pulled up a spectral analysis map. The entire U.S. was red and black, except for a small, shrinking blue circle in the Midwest. We are in a dead zone, Eris explained. The silo explosion in Harlow Bend created a necrotic echo. The entity, the god of this harvest. It hates this spot. It hurts it. That's why the transformation is slower here. So we stay here? Toby asked, hope rising in his voice. No, Eris said. The echo is fading. In 48 hours, this place will be overgrown like the rest. But there's a signal. She pointed to a waveform on the screen. I've been scanning the frequencies beneath the grow command, beneath the static. There's a counter signal. It's weak. It's coming from the west. The Rockies? Who is it? The military? No, Aris said softly. It's older. It's the same language the entity uses, but reversed. It sounds like a prayer. She looked at Toby. I think someone else survived. Someone who knows how to talk back to the dirt. Eli. She didn't say the name, but she remembered the file. The audio recording. The journalist had mentioned a woman who knew the reversal. Maybe they weren't all dead. Maybe the earth hadn't swallowed them whole, or maybe it had, and they were fighting from the inside. We have to go west, Aris said. We need a vehicle that isn't connected to the internet. Something old. No chips, no computers. Toby looked at his jumpsuit. He grinned. A weak, terrified smile. I'm a mechanic. My granddad has a '68 Mustang in the barn next door. Carbureted. Mechanical fuel pump. No brain for the Moss to hijack. Aris closed the laptop. She stood up, swaying slightly as the roots in her lungs tightened. Get it running, she said. We leave at dawn. Why dawn? Toby asked. They see us in the day. Aris looked at the cellar doors. Outside, a low, rhythmic thumping had begun. Not on the doors, but in the ground. Because at night, she whispered, the fields walk. As if to punctuate her sentence, a massive weight slammed into the earth above them, shaking dust from the rafters. A sound echoed through the wood, a deep, bovine lowing, but distorted, as if the throat producing it was 50 feet wide. Arr! Vest. The dirt walls of the cellar began to bleed. Thick red sap oozed from the soil. Change of plans. Aris racked the shotgun slide. We leave now. Part 12. The Scarecrow Highway. The '68 Mustang roared to life, spitting blue smoke. It was loud, too loud, but Toby was right. It was mechanical. The entity couldn't hack a piston. They burst out of the barn doors, splintering the rotting wood. Aris leaned out the passenger window, shotgun in hand. Drive. The interstate. Go. The headlights cut through the darkness. What the light revealed was a nightmare. The cornfields surrounding the farm were moving. The stalks had uprooted themselves. They were slithering across the road like a billion snakes, converging on the house. And rising above the corn were the walkers. They were 30 feet tall, rough approximations of humanoids made of woven hay and rusted farm equipment. Their legs were telephone poles wrapped in vines. Their chests were crushed tractors. And their heads were massive, glowing pumpkins carved with the sigil of the congregation, burning with an internal green fire. One of the walkers turned its burning gaze toward the speeding Mustang. It raised a massive arm made of threshing blades. Hard left, Aris screamed. Toby yanked the wheel. The Mustang drifted, tires screaming, kicking up a spray of gravel. The walker's arms slammed down where they had been a second before, gouging a trench 6 feet deep into the asphalt. It's fast. It's too fast, Toby yelled, shifting gears. Just keep moving. Aris fired the shotgun at the thing's leg. The buckshot hit the wood and sparked, doing nothing. The radio in the dashboard, an old analog dial, suddenly lit up. Dr. Thorne. The voice was coming through the speakers, bypassing the off switch. Where are you going? The experiment is over. The data is collected. Aris smashed the radio faceplate with the butt of her gun. The voice continued, emanating from the metal of the dashboard itself. You are carrying the seed in your lungs, Aris. You are already one of us. Why run? Why not lie down and let the roots take hold? It is so peaceful in the loam. Shut up! Aris screamed. She looked at her hand. The black veins had reached her elbow. She could feel her fingers stiffening, wanting to curl into the shape of a root ball. She looked at Toby. He was driving with panicked focus, tears streaming down his face. Toby, she said, her voice trembling. If I stop making sense, if I try to touch you, you have to push me out. What? Toby shouted over the engine. If I turn, Ari said, grabbing his shoulder with her good hand. You push me out of the car, and you keep driving west. You find the source of the signal. Do you understand? Toby looked at her, terrified. I can't do that. You have to, Aris said. She looked back out the window. The walker was chasing them. It was striding across the fields, matching their speed of 80 miles an hour. Behind it, hundreds of smaller figures, shambling husks of the townspeople, were running on all fours, hunting the noise of the engine. Eris checked the spectral map on her laptop. The signal from the Rockies was pulsing. Morse code? No. It was older. She stared at the pattern. It wasn't just a signal. It was a heartbeat. And then she saw the second signal. It was faint, buried in the noise floor. It was coming from beneath them, beneath the car, beneath the crust of the earth. It was moving east, toward the Atlantic, toward the ocean. Oh, God, Eris whispered. What? Toby yelled. The heart, Oris said, staring at the screen. The heart of the entity isn't in Harlow Bend anymore. It's moving. Moving where? It's going to the water, Oris said, dread cold in her stomach. It's going to the mid-Atlantic ridge. If it roots into the volcanic vents, it will heat the oceans. It will turn the entire atmosphere into a greenhouse in days. She looked at the massive scarecrow looming in the rear-view mirror. Drive faster, Toby. She racked the final shell. We have to warn the west before the sky burns. Toby slammed the pedal to the floor. The Mustang surged forward, speeding into the endless, writhing dark of the new American wilderness. As they drove, the black wheat along the highway bowed in passing, whispering a prayer to the passing engine, a prayer for the metal to rust, for the rubber to rot, and for the meat inside to finally come home. Part 13. The frequency of rot. The rear window of the Mustang exploded inward. Glass pebbles showered the back seat as a tendril of woven barbed wire and desiccated corn husks whipped through the cabin, missing Eris's head by inches. It retracted instantly, snapping like a bullwhip, taking a chunk of the headrest with it. It's reaching inside, Toby screamed, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The car fishtailed on the damp asphalt, the tires struggling for grip against the slick coating of pollen that now covered the road. Keep it steady, Aris barked, though her own heart was hammering against her ribs, a rhythm that felt terrifyingly out of sync with her own biology. She spun in her seat, racking the shotgun one-handed. Through the shattered rear window, the walker filled the night sky. It was a monstrosity of agricultural waste animated by a hateful intelligence. Its strides were impossible, covering 50 yards with every loping step of its telephone pole legs. The pumpkin head blazed with green witchfire, illuminating the highway in a sick, radioactive strobe. Eris fired. The slug took a chunk out of the creature's midsection, blowing apart a cluster of rusted tractor gears and rotted hay. It didn't slow down. If anything, the impact seemed to amuse it. The massive mouth carved into the pumpkin stretched wider, and the radio in the dashboard screeched with feedback. Bullets are just seeds of lead. Doctor, the dashboard voice gurgled, the sound vibrating through the car's chassis. We will swallow them. We will swallow the iron. We will swallow the boy. It's in the car, Toby yelled, slapping at the dashboard. Get it out. Focus on the road, Eris commanded. She dropped the shotgun. It was useless. Conventional physics didn't apply to a god made of nightmares. She grabbed the laptop. The screen was cracked, but the waveform of the Rocky signal was still pulsing that rhythmic, jagged line that looked like a heart in fibrillation. The reversal. Toby, does this thing have a tape deck? Eris shouted over the roar of the wind and the thundering footsteps behind them. What? The stereo. Does it have a cassette player? Yeah. My grandpa has an aux adapter for his phone. In the glove box. Aris popped the latch. A tangle of wires spilled out. She found the cassette adapter, a relic of a bygone era, and jammed it into the deck. She shoved the audio jack into the side of her ruggedized laptop. Turn it up, Eris said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Turn the volume all the way up. What are you going to do? I'm going to introduce a new invasive species, Eris muttered. She maximized the gain on the signal decoder. She isolated the frequency coming from the west, the anti-prayer, the mathematical inversion of the grow command, and hit loop play. For a split second, there was nothing but hiss. Then the speakers erupted. It wasn't a sound. It was a tear in the fabric of the air. It was a discordant, grinding screech that sounded like tectonic plates screaming. It was a frequency that human ears weren't meant to process. A sonic vomit of mathematical impossibility. Toby clapped his hands over his ears, swerving violently. "Turn it off! Drive!" Eris yelled, though she couldn't hear herself. Her teeth vibrated in her gums. The black veins in her neck pulsed painfully, reacting to the noise. It hurt her. It felt like burning acid in her blood. But behind them, the effect was catastrophic. The walker froze mid-stride. The green fire in its pumpkin head flickered and turned a violently bright purple. The vines holding its chassis together began to unspool. The physics that held the hay and iron in the shape of a man simply stopped working. With a sound like a collapsing building, the walker fell forward. Its massive wooden body slammed into the asphalt 50 feet behind the car. The impact shook the ground so hard the Mustang's suspension bottomed out, sparks flying from the undercarriage. The creature disintegrated on impact, exploding into a cloud of dust, rusted metal, and rotten vegetables. Eris slammed the laptop shut, yanking the cord. The silence that followed was deafening. Toby gasped for air, his hands trembling so hard he could barely hold the wheel. What was that?" Eris leaned back against the seat, wiping black ichor from her nose. Her lungs burned. The roots inside her chest had tightened, recoiling from the sound. "Digital herbicide," she whispered hoarse. "That signal, it disrupts the hive mind's carrier wave. It tells the cells to stop listening." She looked at her hand. The bandage was soaked through with dark fluid. The sound had hurt the entity, which meant it had hurt her. "Keep driving," she said, her voice weak. "We bought some time, but now every route within 100 miles knows exactly where we are." Part 14, The Breathing Earth. Day 4. Location, Interstate 70, west of Indianapolis. The landscape had changed. As the sun began to rise, a pale, sickly disk behind a veil of atmospheric ash, the Midwest revealed its new face. The corn was gone. In its place were vast, undulating plains of black moss that looked like velvet. The trees along the highway had merged, their branches fusing together to form long, arched tunnels of wood over the road. They were driving through the gullet of the world. Toby had slowed down. The Mustang was running low on fuel, and the engine temperature was creeping into the red. "We need gas," Toby said, his voice flat. He was in shock. He had stopped reacting to the bodies embedded in the roadside embankments, their limbs waving lazily in the breeze like branches. "There's a truck stop 3 miles up," Eris said, checking the offline maps on her computer. "If the tanks haven't been ruptured by roots, we might find something. And if they have, then we walk." They pulled into the rest stop. The main building, a generic fast food plaza, was entirely consumed by a massive fungal bloom. It looked like a cancerous tumor the size of a cathedral. But the gas pumps stood apart, protected by the concrete island. Toby killed the engine. The silence of the morning was heavy. No birds, no insects, just the wet, rhythmic thump-thump of the earth breathing beneath their feet. "I'll pump," Toby said, grabbing a tire iron from the back seat. "You stay here, rest." Eris didn't argue. She felt heavy. Her left arm was completely numb now. She looked down at her sleeve. The fabric of her jacket was tight. With a trembling hand, she unzipped the cuff. Her arm wasn't flesh anymore. From the elbow down, It was a smooth, dark wood, similar to polished walnut. Her fingers were fused together into a single, sharp point. Leaves, small, translucent, and veined with red, were sprouting from her knuckles. She stared at it. No pain, just a terrible sense of rightness. "No," she whispered, forcing her human hand to zip the jacket back up. "Not yet." She opened the laptop. She needed to focus on the data, the signal. She pulled up the audio file she had played earlier. She ran it through a spectral analyzer again. She had used it as a weapon, but she hadn't really listened to the content. She isolated the background noise of the transmission. There was a voice, buried deep in the static, under the screeching frequencies. Eris plugged in her earbuds. She closed her eyes. "Seal the gate. Soil boils. Reversal." It was a woman's voice, breathless, terrified. Then a second voice cut in. A man. "Sarah, keep reading. Don't stop." The recording clicked and hissed. Then the man's voice again, but different. Older, distorted. "This is Eli Warren. If anyone can hear this, the silo was just the mouth. The stomach is the fault line. It's moving to the faults. You have to kill the witness. You have to..." Static swallowed the rest. Eris rewinded. "You have to kill the witness." Wait, the entity had called Eli the witness of the last dawn. Why would Eli say he had to be killed? Unless he wasn't Eli anymore. A tap on the window made her jump. Toby was standing there, pale as a sheet. He motioned for her to roll down the window. "The pump works," he whispered. "Gravity feed." "But, Eris, you need to see this." "See what?" Inside the station, through the window, Aris stepped out of the car. The air smelled sweet, like rotting flowers and ozone. She followed Toby to the front of the fungal cathedral that used to be a Burger King. The glass was smeared with spores, but she could see inside. The interior was a nest. The tables and chairs had been pushed to the walls. In the center of the room, hanging from the ceiling by thick, slimy cables, were cocoons. Hundreds of them. They were translucent, glowing with a soft amber light. Inside each cocoon was a person. They were curled in the fetal position, floating in fluid, but they weren't dead. They were changing. Eris saw a trucker, his face peaceful as his ribcage slowly expanded, splitting open to reveal not lungs, but a glowing, bioluminescent cage of ferns. "They're incubating," Eris whispered. "It's not just killing us, it's iterating. It's trying to find a better shape." "Look at the one in the middle," Toby pointed. In the center of the cluster, there was a larger cocoon. It wasn't amber, it was black. And inside, Eris squinted. The figure inside was holding something. A radio. An old portable field recorder. The figure's eyes opened. They weren't black. They were human. Bright, piercing blue. The figure inside the cocoon looked directly at Eris. And then, inside Eris's head, a voice spoke. Not the guttural, collective voice of the entity. A clear, human voice. "Run." The glass of the storefront shattered outward. The black cocoon exploded. "Back to the car," Aris screamed, shoving Toby. From the rupture in the building, a shape emerged. It was humanoid, but elongated. Its skin was like white birch bark, hard and segmented, but its face was a perfect, preserved mask of a human man. It was the face of Gideon Hale, the pastor. But he was dead. The report said he walked into the fire. "The shepherd," the thing rasped, its voice sounding like dry leaves skittering on concrete. "The shepherd returns for the stray sheep." Hale, or the thing wearing Hale, raised a hand. The concrete under Toby's feet liquefied. He screamed as he sank to his knees in sudden quicksand. "Toby!" Aris lunged for him, grabbing the back of his jumpsuit with Her good hand. The ground was hungry. It sucked at Toby's legs, pulling him down. "Let me go!" Toby yelled, thrashing. "It's got me! I am not losing my driver!" Aris gritted her teeth. She planted her feet. She needed leverage. She needed strength. She looked at her left arm, the wooden one. Use it! The thought wasn't hers, but she listened to it. Aris thrust her wooden arm into the concrete. The fingers, the sharp root tips, pierced the stone like it was butter. They expanded, hooking into the rebar beneath the pavement, anchoring her. With a scream of exertion, she hauled back with her anchored limb, using the inhuman strength of the infection. She ripped Toby free of the mud with a wet slurp. He flew backward, tumbling onto the hood of the Mustang. "Get in!" Aris roared, ripping her arm free from the concrete. It came away with chunks of stone still clinging to the roots. The hail creature stepped forward. It didn't run. It drifted, the ground flowing beneath it like a conveyor belt. "You accept the gift, Aris." Hale smiled, a gesture that split his birch-bark cheeks. "You use the limb. You are already of the congregation." Aris dove into the passenger seat. "Go, go, go!" Toby scrambled into the driver's side, covered in gray slime. He keyed the ignition. The Mustang roared. They peeled out of the station, tires smoking. In the rearview mirror, Aris watched as Hale stood by the pumps. He didn't chase them. He raised his hand, pointing west. As he pointed, the clouds ahead of them began to swirl. A storm was forming. A green, cyclonic storm directly over the highway. "He's hurting us," Aris realized, clutching her wooden arm to her chest. "He's not trying to stop us. He's pushing us toward the destination." "Why?" Toby wept, wiping slime from his eyes. "Why let us go?" Aris looked at the laptop screen. The signal from the Rockies was stronger now. "Because he wants us to find the resistance," Aris said darkly. "He can't hear the signal, so he's using me to track it." She looked at the black veins spreading up her neck in the reflection of the window. "I'm not a survivor, Toby," she whispered. "I'm a homing beacon." Part 15. The static in the mountains. Day 6. Location: the Colorado border. The plains had given way to foothills. The air was thinner here, colder, and for the first time in days, the pervasive growth seemed to struggle. The black moss didn't cover everything here. There were patches of brown, dry earth. The air smelled of pine and dust, not rot. "It's the altitude," Aris rasped. She was in bad shape. Her left eye was clouding over her, vision in that eye turning into a mosaic of green fractals. "The organism relies on moisture and density. The thin air slows it down." Toby nodded. He hadn't spoken much since the gas station. He drove with a grim, robotic determination. "We're close to the source," Aris said, pointing to the screen. "Cheyenne Mountain, the old NORAD complex." "Of course," Toby muttered. The bunker. They wound their way up the mountain roads. The devastation here was different. It wasn't growth. It was destruction. Landslides had wiped out sections of the guardrail. Massive boulders crushed abandoned military convoys. The earth had tried to shake the mountain apart to get at what was inside. They reached the blast doors of the complex just as the sun began to set. The massive steel doors, designed to withstand a nuclear direct hit, were sealed, but the area around them was a war zone. Scorch marks, craters, and the charred remains of things, not walkers. These looked like wolves, but made of thorns and teeth. "Someone defended this place?" Toby said, looking at the spent brass casings littering the ground. "Recently." Aris stumbled out of the car. She could feel the signal radiating from behind the steel. It was pulling at the iron in her blood. "Hello!" she shouted, her voice cracking. "We have the code! We have the sequence!" Silence. The wind howled through the peaks. Then a crackle of a loudspeaker. "Step away from the vehicle! Hands where we can see them. Toby raised his hands immediately. Eris struggled to raise her left arm. It was heavy. A solid log of wood now. Identify, the voice commanded. Dr. Eris Thorne, CDC, and Toby, a civilian. A red laser dot appeared on Eris's chest, then another on her forehead. Scanner detects massive biological contamination in Subject 1. The voice said, cold and metallic. Subject 1 is compromised. Prepare to engage. No! Toby stepped in front of her. Don't shoot her. She saved me. She knows how to stop it. Step aside, civilian. She is a carrier. I am a carrier, Aris yelled, pushing Toby aside with her human hand. I am carrying the map. I know where the heart is going. It's going to the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. If you kill me, you lose the tracking data. A pause, long and agonizing. Then, the massive gears of the blast door groaned. Dust fell from the frame. Slowly, agonizingly, the doors parted enough to reveal a sliver of darkness. Enter, the voice said. Slowly. If you twitch, the turrets will vaporize you. They walked into the darkness. Inside, the air was recycled, smelling of stale coffee and gun oil. Soldiers in hazmat suits with flamethrowers flanked the corridor. They kept their weapons trained on Eris's wooden arm. A man stepped forward from the shadows. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a tattered flannel shirt and jeans. He looked exhausted, his face covered in stubble, deep bags under his eyes. He held a radio handset in a grip that looked like it would crush the plastic. He looked at Eris, then at her arm. Mid-Atlantic Ridge, the man said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Eris said, leaning against the wall for support. It's using the fault lines to travel. It wants to boil the oceans. The man nodded slowly. He looked at the soldiers. Stand down. Get her to the infirmary. Quarantine level 4, but keep her alive. He turned to walk away. Wait, Eris called out. Who are you? Are you Eli Warren? The man stopped. He turned back, the ghost of a sad smile on his face. No, he said. Eli didn't make it out of Harlow Bend. At least, not whole. He tapped the radio on his belt. Eli is the one transmitting the code, the man said. He's transmitting it from inside the entity. He's the ghost in the machine. The man extended a hand. I'm Paul. I was the sound engineer at the station. I'm the one recording him. He looked at Eris's wooden arm, then up to her eyes. You said you know where the heart is. That means we have a target. A target for what? Toby asked. Paul gestured deeper into the mountain complex, where rows of lights were flickering to life, illuminating a massive, sleek shape sitting on a launch rail in the center of the hollowed-out cavern. We have one ICBM left, Paul said. We couldn't launch it because we didn't have coordinates. The satellites are down. We were blind. He looked at Eris. But if you're connected to the network, and if you can see the heart, Eris understood. A chill that had nothing to do with the fever swept through her. You want me to guide it? She whispered. You're the guidance system, Doctor, Paul said grimly. We're going to plug you in, and you're going to fly this bomb right down God's throat.